Good evening, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here this evening and a pleasure to welcome Carly Bari from the United States Census 2020 crew. So I'm just going to right now turn it over to Carly, and she has a presentation and she promised to answer all of our questions at the end. So Carly, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for having me and joining this call and joining us digitally in these special circumstances. So I'm just going to do an overview of the 2020 census, what it means, what to expect, and then talk a little bit about our special operations. And then I'm sure folks will have a lot of questions. This is the first time I'm giving this presentation since we've been in coronavirus world. So I don't know if I'll be able to answer all of your questions, but we'll give it a shot. So it'll take me probably about 20 minutes to go through this, and then we'll open up for questions. So my name is Carly Bari, and I am a partnership specialist out of the New York region. The New York region for the Census Bureau covers all of New England, New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico. And there's several people in my position across the state reaching out and doing community organization and education of the census.
Carly, we missed we lost your screen sharing.
Oh, okay. Just a second. Okay. Let me find my Zoom here.
I can share mine if you like.
Yeah, it looks like my Zoom got disconnected.
Okay, let me share my screen. And whoops, I'm at the end. Let me go to the beginning. Yeah, they accuse me of doing everything backwards. So just, there we go. Can everybody see that? If you can't, let me know, okay?
I can.
Okay. So go
All right.
ahead.
All right. So I guess I'll ask you to go to the next slide. All right, perfect. So the 2020 or the U.S. Census Bureau is the largest statistical agency in the United States. We are the leading source of data about the nation's people and economy. And a lot of people wonder what we do between each of the decennial census. And we actually run 130 different surveys and programs. So this is just a list of a few of them, and I'll read them out for those who might not be able, who have just called in without screening. So we do the decennial census, we cover the American Community Survey, Current Population Survey, American Housing Survey. We also run an economic census and a census of governments. And those last two are run every 5 years on years ending 2 and 7. Most people are most familiar with American Community Survey. It is a much longer survey. It's an ongoing survey that happens every month, and it is sent to a small portion of the population. And some folks might remember there used to be a long form and a short form for the decennial census. There is no longer a long form, and essentially the American Community Survey has taken the place of that long form. So between that and the decennial census, we get a really good overview of where our people and our demographics are. Next slide, please. So the reason we talk about this is just to be survey aware. It's important to recognize that the Census Bureau is out in the community all the time. It's just that no one really pays attention to us until every 10 years rolls around. You know, you may have already interacted with someone from the census. You may have participated in one of our preparations for the 2020 census. There were some test surveys that went out last year and the year before. We had address canvassing operation that happened last fall. So the important thing is to note is that all of those things are not the decennial census, and it's important to complete everything that you receive from the Census Bureau. So if you already did the American Community Survey, it's important that you also complete the 2020 census. Additionally, here in Massachusetts, we do an annual town listing for every city and town, or street listing, and that is not in any way related to the Census Bureau. So in Massachusetts, we're all going to complete 2 census this year. We're going to do our federal census, and most of us have already completed our town or city census in January or February. We also want to make sure that everyone knows we are aware that frauds and scams are just part of the game these days. And so we have set up this online and phone hotline so people can report any scams or frauds that they might interact with. And we really appreciate you doing so that we can make sure to stop them and to notify people so that they aren't victims to any scams or fraud. Next slide, please.
What kind of frauds do you see?
So a lot of times it's mimicking a census form, or there have been talk about, I haven't heard of this actually happening, but a lot of people worry that individuals may impersonate a census taker going door to door. And then also just there could be people, email scams, people asking, saying they're from the Census Bureau and trying to collect your personal information via email or something like that. The only one I've really heard of being active recently there was something in relation to a political campaign that looked like the census. Yeah.
We heard about that.
Yeah. So the goal for the census is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. We're estimating to count 330 million people this year, so it's a huge endeavor. And that's why we've really been reaching out to different community organizations to get the word out and help people understand why we do the census and why it's important. As most people know, it is mandated by the U.S. Constitution to happen every 10 years. The first one was in 1790, and the purpose for the census is to determine our representation and our funding. Our tagline for the census is that it's safe, easy, and important, and I'll talk about each one of those things in the next few slides. So next slide, please. So it's important because it determines the number of seats in the House of Representatives for each state. It also helps us define congressional and state legislative districts. And then what really catches folks' attention is it helps us determine how $675 billion in federal funding are allocated every year. So that federal funding is for infrastructure and social services. Infrastructure being roads, libraries, schools, senior centers, things like that. And then social services being a whole list of things. There's a few listed on this slide, but some highlights include SNAP, WIC, Section 8 housing, Medicaid, school lunch programs, things like that. So it really does affect every part of our lives, especially for those who might be needing extra assistance in their day-to-day life. The other thing that's really important to keep in mind is that it's critical to have an accurate census because we only do this once every 10 years. So these are the numbers we're going to use for the next 10 years. So if we're undercounted now, we're going to be underfunded and underrepresented for the next 10 years, and that can be really, really detrimental. So next slide, please. And then it's safe. So confidentiality is of the utmost importance to the Census Bureau. We operate under Title 13, which is a federal law that says everyone's individual census data cannot be shared with anyone else, including other government agencies. So the FBI, ICE cannot get access to individual census data. We also remind people that their landlord is never going to see this. Any housing assistance or housing vouchers that they rely on will not be affected by their census data because it is not shared publicly. The only thing that is shared publicly are our combined statistics. The statistical data is shared with the public, but no one can get your individual census data. Every Census Bureau employee, including myself, takes a lifetime oath to protect individual census data. If we were to violate that, we could face a federal prison sentence or a $250,000 fine or both. And that's for each individual violation. So that's just to kind of emphasize how serious we take confidentiality at the Census Bureau. Next slide, please. So, and then it's easy. So you can respond to the 2020 census online, by phone, or by paper. And those three ways are what we consider self-response. If you don't self-respond, then a census taker will visit your home to collect your census data in person. The form is very short, like I was mentioning before. It's about 10 questions. Those questions include name, age, date of birth, race, origin, relationship, sex, tenure, meaning do you rent or own your home, and then some operational questions. Back to the scams and frauds, some things we will never ask for include social security number, money or bank account information, and then we will never be affiliated with a political strategy or political party. So if there is ever census information linked to something political, that is key to know that that's a scam or a fraud. It sounds like, kind of from the chatter before this call, some of us have already responded to the census. I have done it myself, and I can attest that it is very simple and straightforward. It took me very little time to complete it. And most everyone should be able to either respond online or by phone right now, and then paper mailings will go out later if that's your preferred method, and we'll talk about the schedule in a little bit. So next slide, please. And additionally, we have a huge language support program this year. So online and by phone, you can respond to the census in these 12 non-English languages. Those plus English cover about 99% of the population. So online, you can select whichever one of these languages you want to respond in, and the whole form is in that language. And then by phone, if you go to the next slide, please. There is a phone number specific for each language. So you don't have to spend a lot of time on a phone tree. You dial the number specifically for that language, and you'll speak to a human who speaks that language to respond to the census. And this is a really great option for people who might not be very tech savvy, or might not have good internet access, or simply might just not trust providing their information online. So these phone numbers are active now, and anyone can call them at any, well, not any time, sorry, take that back. Here on the East Coast, the call center is open from 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. every day. So that's a really good option for people. Next slide, please. And then in addition to those 12 non-English languages, we have additional support online for up to 59 non-English languages, which are listed here on this slide. So that means that the questionnaire isn't in each one of those languages, but we have written and verbal description in each one of these languages, helping people to understand how to complete their census form. So that is really helpful and good for folks who may not be literate in their language that they traditionally speak. Additionally, some areas will receive Spanish mailings. So this paper questionnaire is available in Spanish and English only, but not everyone will receive Spanish mailings. Spanish mailings will only go to census tracts that have been identified to have a large Spanish-speaking population. There is one census tract in Waltham that will receive Spanish mailings. But there are very few total in Middlesex County. I think there's probably only, I'd say less than 10. Next slide, please. So this is the schedule for what to expect. So we are in the midst of both the first and second mailing. So before the call started, there was some chatter. It sounds like some people have received both the first and second mailing, but the first mailing is your initial invitation to respond online and by phone. And everyone should receive that first mailing before Friday. So sometime between March 12th and March 20th. And then everyone is also receiving this first reminder letter. And that is already in the mail hopper. I know I received mine today, and I received my invitation on Friday. So it was about 3 mailing days apart. After that, though, if you have responded to the census, you will stop getting mail from us and no one will come visit you at your house. So a good way to avoid the Census Bureau is to fill out your census as quickly as possible. If you haven't responded, then you will receive a reminder postcard at the end of this month into early April. And then back to that paper questionnaire, if your preference is to fill out the census by paper, that paper questionnaire will come in the 4th mailing, sometime between April 8th and April 16th. There are a few places, not in Waltham, but a few places in the Boston area who have been identified to have low internet access, and they actually receive their paper invitation in the, or paper questionnaire in the first mailing as well. And those places with low internet access, that means low internet access in the home. So that we usually see that in very rural areas and very low income areas. And again, there are very few parts of Middlesex County, none of which are in the Waltham area, that would fall under that category. Then a final reminder will go out at the end of April in the mail. And after that, census takers are out in the field. So the census takers are supposed to go out in the field starting May 13th. Now with coronavirus, we might see a shift in some of those dates. Probably not for the mail, but for sending people out and about, just because it has, it may have some effect on our training of those employees and then being able to get them out in the field. So May 13th is what we have now on the books, but subject to change, I think. So next slide, please. So some of the ways that you can help us is to share the message that the census is safe, easy, and important. And I can't tell you how critical this is now in the situation that we find ourselves with coronavirus. We had so many different events planned and outreach plans for, you know, the next 3 or 4 weeks, and all of that has had to be canceled. So we are trying to change our strategy, switch to a much more digital strategy. But if you have any ideas within your own communities on how to get the word out about how, you know, important this is, and help people understand that it's the most accessible census that there ever has been, so they can do this at home without having to go anywhere or talk to anyone if they want. And just make sure that people know that it is still important despite everything that we are going through right now. Sorry, I just got kicked off of my internet.
Just let me know when you should be familiar with the slide deck. I can just keep going here.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing is we are still recruiting for census jobs. So our recruiting efforts are dying down, but we are still, the online application is still available. And you can just go, if you go to the next slide, please, you can see that we have to hire like tens of thousands of people across the country and across the state to become census takers. And so we are in the midst of hiring those people. And then, like I mentioned earlier, trying to train them all, which is proving to be a little bit challenging right now. But because the census is constitutionally obligated, we are moving forward with our efforts. These jobs are, they They are part-time flexible jobs, so you can work 10 hours a week or 40 hours a week. You can work nights and weekends, and the pay is really, really good. So to work those jobs, you can apply at 2020census.gov/jobs, and the only requirements are that you're 18 and have a social security number. So next slide, please. So these are some of our field operations. Group quarters is an operation where we count everyone who lives in a group living facility that is receiving services. So this includes dorms, prisons, nursing homes, rehab facilities, and things like that. So what advanced contact means is that we have contacted the administration for all of those facilities to work directly with them to determine the best way to collect their census information for the residents that they serve. So oftentimes those residents don't actually really individually participate in the census. The administration usually helps provide the census data directly to the Census Bureau. Within our group quarters, we have service-based enumeration, which is the count for collecting information on people experiencing homelessness. And so in that operation, we visit soup kitchens, mobile food distributions, homeless shelters, and outdoor locations where we know folks who are experiencing homeless tend to congregate or live. And we will collect census information from those folks that way. And that operation is supposed to happen between March 30th and April 1st. And again, I think we're trying to determine if those dates will remain the same or if there might be some changes in those dates, mostly because I think some of the shelters are closed. So then group quarters, the actual counting of folks who live in group quarters or collecting that information starts on April 1st. And then I don't really talk about enumeration of transitory locations very much because it doesn't apply to this area very much. That is for counting folks who live in campgrounds that are not homeless, but live in campgrounds or in like a houseboat or something like that, which we just don't have very many of in Middlesex County. And that's primarily where I work, is in Middlesex County. Early non-response follow-up. So in areas where there is a large off-campus student population, we send enumerators out in the field early, starting on April 9th. Again, this is a little bit challenging right now because so many of the student population has left and are not attending school as they normally would have. We still are counting college students where they live and sleep most of the time, so they should be counted where they go to school, even if they are not actually here right now. And then, as I mentioned before, non-response follow-up begins on May 13th, where we're visiting every home that has not completed their census. Next slide, please. So this is some of our partners' websites that are providing a lot of really great census information, and Annette has these slides, so she can distribute them to the folks that are on this call. But essentially, at our website, 2020census.gov, we have a ton of information and materials that everyone can either put online or print out, or we have social media content that people can share. And I think we are working to develop even more, if that could even be possible, to help with our shifting and efforts towards more of a much more digital campaign. Next slide, please. Some other initiatives that we kind of had, a lot of them we're passing these dates, which is amazing. Statistics in Schools was the first week of March. That was Statistics in Schools Week. And what that was an initiative that we have to help kids learn about the census at school, and then we found in 2010 that they take that message home, and we saw a much greater response. That program offers lesson plans online, free to educators or anyone really, for grades K through 12 in all subject areas, which actually could be really great right now with all the kids being at home looking for something online, some online material for those parents to help them find some educational activities at home. Self-response started last Thursday on March 12th. And then another really exciting thing we have is we are going to see real-time results and how many people are responding to the census. So starting on Friday, March 20th, we are going to get daily updates on the percentage of people who have responded to the census in each census tract. So this will be really helpful in gauging how we know how we're doing, what areas we really need to do more outreach in, or find more assistance, and it'll really give us a good idea of how this first digital census is doing. Worship weekend is scheduled for March 27th to 29th. I have a feeling that is subject to change, but initially that initiative is meant to encourage all the different houses of worship to bring their congregations together and make sure that they are aware of the census and understand how important it is. And then Census Day is April 1st. So that's a historical day. It helps draw the line in the sand. It's actually the day that the census is asking you how many people live in your home on April 1st. And it also helps in certain circumstances where there might be a child who has split custody between two parents, and they might not live. We want to count them where they live and sleep most of the time, but if it's truly a 50-50 custody sharing, then we want them counted where they live and sleep on April 1st. So, but for the most part, we just want people counted where they live and sleep most of the time, but April 1st is kind of a good tiebreaker for people who maybe aren't sure. And then next slide, please. So just a couple more slides. This is a tool called Response Outreach Area Mapper. It's called ROAM for short. And it is a public tool that's available to everyone at census.gov/ROAM. And essentially what you see is it's a map. And if you go to the next slide, please. So this is a zoomed in area of the map. So this is part of Boston. And each one of those shapes is a census tract. And if you click on one of those shapes, it pops up with all of this socioeconomic and demographic information about the people who live in that tract. The average population for each census tract is around 4,000 people. And this slide shows some of that socioeconomic and demographic information, but it's truncated. The list goes on and on. You get so much information. This data comes from the American Community Survey that I mentioned very beginning of this presentation. In the map, you see that different areas have different shades of blue. The darker areas are areas that we consider hard to count. And in the red box, you can see that each census tract is given a low response score. And that is a prediction for how many people we expect to not self-respond on the 2020 census. So that's what makes it hard to count, is that we expect there to be a high non-self-response rate. So those are the areas that our team has been working with primarily for the past year or more to really engage partners in those areas. But Waltham has one census tract that is pretty dark blue. In other words, it's pretty hard to count. Some hard to count demographics that we find are very common are low income, the immigration population, highly transitory young adults, so college students particularly, and young adults who are moving frequently. Single mother households are challenging to count. Children under 5 were the most undercounted population in 2010. We don't know for sure why, but we've had a really big initiative to make sure that everyone knows that, and everyone knows to include all of their children, including all their tiny little babies, on their census form. My suspicion is that there's more transitory children than we realize, or kids that might stay with relatives on a temporary basis and they're going to get missed. So that's a good reminder for folks that anyone who is staying with you temporarily but does not have another permanent residence should be counted on your census form, even if that is not considered their permanent residence, because the important point is to get them counted. And if they have nowhere else to be counted, then they should be included on your census form. You know, so if you have a nephew or something that's staying with you for a couple months while they get on their feet, that person should be included on your census form. And I also think that, for example, like foster children often don't get included on census forms. So next slide, please. So this is our mail contact strategies viewer. Again, this is available online, but essentially this map is showing us all of those kind of special cases that I mentioned before, including who gets Spanish and English mailings versus just the English mailings, and then who's getting that paper invitation in the first mailing for those areas that have low internet service. So just to break it down, the light purple areas are kind of our standard, the standard schedule where you're getting English only and you're not receiving the paper questionnaire in the mail because you have good internet access in the home. The dark purple is, again, good internet access in the home, but will also be receiving the Spanish and English mailings. And then the light green are those areas that are considered to have low internet access at home. So they'll be receiving English mailings as well as the paper questionnaire in the first mailing. And then the dark green are Spanish and English mailings as well as the paper form in the first mailing. So again, this is primarily, this map is zoomed in on the Boston area, but as you can see out in the Western Metro, it's pretty much all that light purple. So just people getting the paper or the paper form in the fourth mailing and English mailings only. Next slide, please. So one last tool that I'll tell you about is our data dissemination program. All census data is available to the public. Some of it can be hard to find because there is so much of it. So this is really helpful for folks who work with, especially folks that write grants. Our data dissemination program has webinars and training sessions available and staff available to help you find the data you're looking for. Next slide. So we're available on all of the social media platforms, so feel free to follow us and repost anything that we post so that we can continue to get the word out further. And then last slide is just our contact information. And then I am, happy to get connected. If anyone has any specific needs in this area, I'd be happy to help you with that. And Annette or Georgie could help you get in contact with me. So with that, I think I'll open it up for questions.
Okay, I have just about everybody muted. You can unmute yourselves, or if you have a problem, let me know. And I'll turn my video on as well, so Sue, you're not the only one there. Well, Georgie had sent me some asking, let's see, how's the data collection going? Do you have any early statistics, Carly?
We received a mailing on Friday that said 5 million people had responded to the census. That's the only thing I've heard. I think we're all anxiously awaiting for Friday to see. So those real-time results are going to be displayed in a map similar to that Roam tool I was showing you in the slide. So it'll be, you know, different shaded areas for each census tract displaying, you know, some range of percentage of response. So I think everyone's just really excited to see what that looks like on Friday.
Okay. The next question, Georgie says she got her invitation, responded, got a reminder. How long will it take to remove our address? And I think you answered that. We're only going to get the second letter unless we don't respond, correct?
Yeah, well, actually, everyone's getting the second mailing,
Yep.
because even if you responded right when you got your first one, that second mailer was it was more of a procedural operational issue.
Yeah,
That second mailing was in the mail hopper before they could computate any results. But after that, if you've responded to the census now, you should not receive any more census mailing.
Next question, what kinds of scams are you seeing? We covered that. One thing that Georgie had suggested is that whenever we use a charge card, look around and remind people to fill out their census forms.
Yep, that's a good way too.
Okay, any other things that individuals should consider doing?
You know, like I said just now, it's really, you know, I think one of our challenges is that any news coverage the census was going to receive is being very overshadowed by, you know, the pandemic that we're experiencing, which is understandable, but it also makes our job even harder to remind people that, you know, while we are experiencing this very challenging time, that this census still is going to determine our representation and funding for the next 10 years. So kind of sliding it in there, like, you know, I've heard of people saying, oh, we should, you know, it's just hard because it's not really on people's priority list right now with everything going on. But again, it is very easy. It takes very little time. So just encouraging people to take a few minutes to do it is really crucial.
Okay, one question that came to mind while you were going through your presentation, it looks like most of the activities are scheduled to end in July. Is that an end date mandated by law, or is that part of your planning? And if it is part of your planning, I would think that you could push that out if necessary because of the corona situation now. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, so I did forget to mention that the end of our operation is the end of July. I have, the way I understand it is there is some flexibility with that date depending on our operational needs. What we are constitutionally mandated is that we provide the results to the president by December 31st of 2020. So that is a date that we can't push on. And so, yeah, we do have some wiggle room, and, you know, we're going to evaluate things as they need to be, and, you know, modify things as needed. But we do expect to provide those results to the president by December 31st, 2020.
Okay. What questions do people have?
I have a question.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Karen. At the very beginning, regarding giving people peace of mind about what comes in the mail, I don't think it was specified, but it said on the slide that there are ways to determine that what you're receiving in the mail is legitimate. And I'm not sure that was specified, you know, what people can look for. Could you respond to that?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, all the mailings will be very official from the Census Bureau. They, you know, have the census emblem on them, and there's several phone numbers on there that you can call to verify whether or not it's a legitimate piece of mail and a legitimate survey. So that's one way. And then also just, again, remembering that most people are not receiving the questionnaire in the mail until later in April. So No, most people should be logging online or calling by phone to respond to the census at this point in time. When we have census takers out in the field, they all have a ID with their name on it and the Census Bureau emblem on it. They will be issued iPhones that have the Census Bureau emblem on the back, and they will all have a U.S. Census badge. And so, and they'll also have a phone number for folks to call and verify that they're a legitimate census worker if someone's in question about that. But mostly, it's good to know that the Census Bureau is not emailing anyone to collect census information. They are not calling anyone. However, on the census form, if you completed it, you know that they do ask for a phone number. And that phone number is only used to follow up on any questions or verify any information on your census form. So if you complete your form fully, then you shouldn't ever have a call from the Census Bureau. But, if you skip a bunch of questions or things don't quite add up quite right, or, you say you have 5 people living in your house, but you only respond for 3 people, then the Census Bureau may call you to follow up to collect that information. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
This is Georgie. Could you use the reverse 911 we have in Waltham to remind everyone to fill out their census?
I don't know. I don't know what that is.
That might be worth discussing with the mayor.
Yeah, or bringing that to the Waltham Complete Count Committee, Rob Waddick and Carlos Vidal. That might be something good to suggest to them.
I have.
You may want to speak with Jeanette about it, Georgie, as well.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. This is George.
And I can try to plug that too.
Okay. George, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just curious. Thank you for doing this evening.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It's great. What percentage of the citizens do you forecast that you'll have to go door to door? Is it like 10% or 20%?
Well, so that Roam tool is kind of saying, for that example down in Dorchester, it's saying, there was like 32.9% low response score. And essentially that means 32.9% of those people, we would have to visit them going door to door. So that's and that data is pulling from 2010 census response as well as American Community Survey data and response rates and things like that. But I think what we just won't know is how people are responding to this first digital census. So I think that's what we are all really anxious to find out about on Friday when we see those first results come in. That will really give us a benchmark for how much work is ahead of us, and also how people have responded to converting the census to a digital one. And then we might, things might also be swayed because of the pandemic as well. So
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, but no, we don't have an idea really.
I've got a note here from Kathy Ann saying she has some questions, a text actually, and I'm asking her what they are.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions while I'm waiting for a response
This
here?
is Georgie again.
No, can you hear me? This is Kathy Ann. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. So I actually saw your presentation at City Council, and thank you again for coming on this tonight, and thank you to the League for pulling this together. I think it's an important reminder and update, and I'm glad this is being recorded for future sharing for those that couldn't make it tonight. My question is, how are we, with everything going on and safe social distancing and such, what kind of training and or education are you giving the census workers so that they create, you know, kind of that safe boundary as they're taking the census to protect themselves and also to protect the households, you know, that they'll be surveying, so people feel comfortable in answering the door should they not have answered the mailing or gone online or gone on the phone. So I'm sure this is hitting you guys as fast as it is every municipality, but I'm also sure you've had to develop a strategy. Do you mind responding to that?
I don't. So to be quite frank, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that our leadership is working to adapt to the current situation. So, you know, part of the reason I don't know is that this is all of these decisions are happening way above my pay grade. And that information hasn't been disseminated down to us in the past, you know, week or so that we've been really having to maneuver and adapt to this situation.
Okay.
But with that being said, most of our census staff, our enumeration staff, those people that go door to door, they have not yet actually done all of their training. So I suspect that there will be modifications to their training to include discussing the best ways to protect everyone's safety and health, and that is ultimately the priority for the Census Bureau, is to make sure that all of their staff and anyone who their staff interacts with, including the general public, remains safe and healthy.
No, it's a great response. So with that said, I mean, are you guys possibly recommending beyond the door-to-door that the clerk's office or the city of Waltham beef up any social media campaigns or anything to kind of get out the word that to respond to the mailers and possibly do the phone calls in the various languages that are available? I mean, I'm just kind of, you know, passing this back and forth, but just thoughts about social media and outreach now that everybody is home and sheltering in place, like ways we can get the word out so people can get ahead of the door-to-door.
Yeah. So that's exactly our strategy, is to try to encourage as many people as possible to complete this at home, online, by phone, even by paper. Yes, what we, you know, ideally, especially in this situation, is that we have as many people as possible self-respond without having to interact with a census taker. So we are working on our messaging. One of the challenges for the Census Bureau is this is a national operation. So whatever messaging that we use, we need to make it consistent across the whole nation. And so that's why it takes us a little bit longer to turn around exactly, you know, what we want to share with folks. But right now, our message is that this is the most accessible census that has ever existed, and to please encourage everyone to respond as soon as you get your census form, and respond online or by phone initially. So that's kind of where we're at now. But yes, I think we will be working in the next week or so to develop the messaging that we want to share with folks, and to help. We are working on creating more social media content to share with all of our partners, including city and town governments and other people that we've been working with for the past year to post on their social media and to get the word out as much as possible.
Well, we want to do our part, and we certainly thank you for, kind of going back and forth on this. I think those are great strategies to try to get the census answered, before you go to the door. I think our fail-safe, when you spoke before council, I had a great dialogue with you, and I think our fail-safe on this was to basically count on the door. And I think now, in light of where we are, we really need to push that to the foreground and try to get as much as possible so that at the door is a little bit less, just to ease people's concerns, just in general. So I do thank you, and I look forward to that new content. And again, I want to thank you for presenting tonight. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions now?
I do.
Okay,
Or,
Georgie.
I've been listening to the blow-by-blow descriptions that come from the news media about the, the daily census count, the daily count and all this other type of thing. I think we ought to suggest to the news media that they include a thing about the census. It would certainly be a different piece of information, and I think you ought to get. I think you ought to get Governor Baker to put that on his list.
Yeah, I think we have suggested some of that to the leadership, but yeah, I think that's a great idea. I would love to see, they're essentially doing daily press conferences. I'd love to see them just to add the census to the end of every one. So,
yes, as we all know, when it snows, we get a flake by flake forecast.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so yeah, I mean, that's a great suggestion. I think that suggestion has gone up the ladder. I just don't know, you can only.
Yeah, it's about your pay grade, but it's a suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay, well, are there any more questions before we let Carly go?
Well, I want to say thank you for doing this, and this is our first adventure in the 21st century in doing this, and thank you to Annette for pitching in.
Yeah, good work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The irony is I make part of my living by coaching, and we do all of our coaching using Zoom, and it's so easy, and we'll talk more about what the league might be able to do with it. But in the meantime, Carly, I really thank you so very much. Appreciate your flexibility, and I'm sure we'll be in touch before the end of July. And
Yeah.
we will.
Yeah, thank you all so much for hosting and also being flexible and converting digitally for this, and I appreciate it.
Okay.
Be well and stay well. Those are my new philosophies.
Yeah.